Well, good morning, and it's my pleasure to be here and address the August gathering which we have here, right? It's also a pleasure to see one of our professor in here, right? So when I joined the institute, I used to go to Professor Yadav for a lot of guidance. So it's a pleasure to see you here, sir. My presentation would be more talking about the future of supply chain and logistics, right? So we already have seen a lot on what is really happening, what is the need in the industry, for logistics, what kind of infrastructure regarding solutions which are actually required in the industry. So I'll not get into that details, but before I really get into the discussion, let me very quickly brief you about what we do and what we are in Dow in India, right? So a very, very quick brief about what we do. So Dow India is actually a well-established company here in India with 3 manufacturing locations, 1 R&D center, 1 global excellence center, and 1 engineering center. We actually works across the globe on actually manufacturing excellence as well as supply chain excellence, right? So with all this center here, we are clearly established here in India, right? So if you also look at Dow as a whole globally, we actually manufacture in 31 different countries. We supply our products in 60 different countries, and we sell somewhere around 5,000 products across the globe. So now you understand the complexity of the supply chain and the logistic across the globe, right? So it's not easy to actually take products in and move it across different regions, right? There are a lot of challenges with respect to hazardous product, non-hazardous product, compliant with respect to different solvents in your product. If you are looking at supplying to pharma, if you are looking at supplying to the automotive industry, so those complexities are something which really needs to be addressed when you are looking at such a mass of going across different countries and different regions, right? If you also look at what we are striving towards is with respect to being a company which is very innovative, sustainable, customer-centric, and sustainable. And I think all these 4 different words add up to what is actually happening in the supply chain and in the logistic arena, right? And I think today when we are really looking at the topics which we have, all of these are actually covered, right? With respect to, being the areas where actually we are in with respect to packaging, consumer, and mobility, these are areas where we see a lot of challenges as well as a lot of new requirements coming up with respect to regulations, and these areas are becoming more and more important when you are actually looking to strategize on the supply chain as well as on the logistic part, right? So if you see the next slide, and we are talking about growth, right? We are talking about moving from around 200 billion to around 300 billion by 2025 for India. We are talking about being a $1 trillion economy by 2040. We are talking about kind of a 2 trillion economy by, say, somewhere around 2047. We are talking about going towards a reduced carbon footprint reduction. We are talking about by 2070, we will actually be net zero. So those are, challenges for us, and those are also opportunities for us, right? And also, if you really look at the consumption, right now we are talking about a 30 million metric ton of consumption in the Indian market. And right now we are just 3% of the share. Now, if you have to move towards 4%, and then we have to move towards more percentage because India is really, really growing, I think there's a lot of challenges, with respect to, the supply chain and with respect to logistics. Now, if you look at what India is really driving, and with respect to a lot of PLI schemes, the Gati Shakti and the Vikasit Bharat schemes, those are really been successful, and there's a lot of infrastructure development which is happening, and that is really helping out with respect to the movements. You have seen the kind of infrastructure development, road logistics, transport, with respect to moving from road to railways, and what is the importance of that is what maybe I'll talk about. When you're talking about multimodal connections, technology integrations, having economic zones, as my friend mentioned with respect to imports, right? And a lot of imports are coming into India, and a lot of exports are happening from India to the world, right? So you need a lot of FTZs, right? You lot of special economic zones. You need to see how you can get in your material, control your inventory, and still supply to the industry so that they can export it back, right? And that has been one of the things that we have seen in China, is that they have been establishing their warehouses, and the incentives they actually provide for exports is substantial. Now, if we have to really look at India and see how we can really incentivize exports, then I think some of these kind of infrastructure development is actually very important. Now, when you have to supply to the pharma industry, and the pharma industry exports a lot of material out from here to the globe, if they have to really claim that export benefit, right, then you need to have a lot of the warehouses which are also certified GMP, right, certified good manufacturing practices. So those are important parameters which we have to look at. Now let me very quickly talk about the 4 major pillars, and I think we already had a good discussion about what are the 4 major pillars to look at, right? So when you look at the 4 major pillars, we are looking at people, which is actually very important. We are looking at safety, we are looking at sustainability, and we are looking at technology, right? Now, if you first start with people, and like we already saw that a very important role is played by the truck drivers, right? And how are we really working on, with that population? How are we really taking care of them on the ground? They drive, right? So they drive across, 5 days, sometimes at night. So creating an environment where they feel recognized and creating an environment where they feel that they are taken care of makes a lot of, positive to a kind of positive influence to the logistic supplier, right? When it also comes to with respect to creating infrastructure where they can actually take care with respect to their hygiene part. If you can allow them for a sleeping area. So those are things where really things are getting worked on, right? So what is also important is that how do we really recognize these people, right? So the recognition process is very important in the supply chain and in the logistic piece, is because this is a very complicated structure, right? And these complications is majorly can be sorted out by if you are really recognizing people to a certain extent. So in Dow we have this 4-star awards, right, where you're talking about safety, social, sustainability, these pieces to really recognize people in logistics. The other thing which is actually very important is looking at women in logistics, right? And if you see in here, I think I just counted, we have 4 women in the whole hall, right? So which is maybe around 1 or 2%, right? So if you have to really move towards the next 10 years, right, and you see how we can have women contribution to the logistics and supply chain, I think that's a very important parameter which needs to look at, because that diversity brings in a lot of thought process, right? And the tie-up which has actually happened across the globe with respect to the chemical companies tying up with different partners where they're looking at how they can really develop women in logistics, right? And that's happening in Europe to a great extent, and I think that's one thing which we can really get in the Indian scope of things to really see how that advancement can be done. And I think with respect to safety, with respect to the transportation piece, I think we already spoke about it, right? So there's a lot of hazardous chemical movement across the globe, right? And when you are really doing that, an important parameter is with respect to the restrictions coming in different countries, right? So when you are importing it, I think it's kind of okay because you already have a specific compliance requirement for India. But when you are exporting the material, it is important that you clearly check that what is the compliance of that particular material across the globe, because there's a lot of compliance and restrictions coming up across the globe, and sometimes our material can get stuck at ports, right? Sometimes which is the product which is allowed in India might not be the product which is allowed maybe in in one of the countries in Europe. Like Europe, we can say European Union, but Europe has internal countries, has got their internal regulations. So I think it's very important that we really also pay a heed with respect to the MSDS and how the MSDS are actually created, and how those criticalities are built into logistics. Otherwise, you will have a tremendous problem with respect to getting your container at one port and the country saying that, folks, this is not allowed in my country, right? And with a lot of those regulations coming up day in and day out, keeping a track of those regulations become very, very important, right? With respect to also the technology piece, right? And I think Nicer Globe, with respect to safety and technology, has done a lot of good work with respect to getting in, real-time data, being quickly, coming down and taking care of any kind of spills. So I think that is happening. What is also happening in logistics and warehouse is the use of drone, right? And we know that, okay, from the warehousing perspective, barcoding or using robotics, that's already happening and that's already in place. But can you actually use drones to really utilize them in the warehouse to really figure out if there's any kind of leakage or if there's any kind of challenges which you might see with respect to bulging of a drum or with respect to kind of any tear, and then you can actually prevent any kind of safety challenges with respect to those challenges where the drone can really identify that and kind of move forward, right? Now there are two more things which I really want to talk about, is with respect to sustainability and with respect to the scope 1, scope 2 and scope 3 emissions, right? Now when it comes to sustainability, you can divide this in two pieces. One is the packaging material, right? And we took a pledge in the morning. It is becoming very, very important that when you are getting imports as well as when you are doing your exports, the packaging material and the restrictions of those packaging material in different countries are different, right? So we need to pay a heed with respect to those packaging material and where those packaging material are coming in from, and what kind of sustainable material you are actually using in those packaging material, right? So that's a very, very important parameter which we are seeing across the globe, where more and more restrictions are coming in on what kind of packaging material you are using, right? The other piece is that the industry is working on new concepts with respect to some of the packaging material producers, where these producers and the supplying companies, they are already working on a kind of agreement where that packaging material producing company is actually accountable for any kind of spill of powders or pellets, right, getting into the different natural resources, right? Because there's a heavy penalty which is actually coming up with respect to any spill which can go into any of our water bodies or any of our ground, and can lead to ground contamination. And they're pretty heavy fines in the European Union for any spill which is actually happening. The other piece is that with respect to scope 3 emission. Now, if you really look at a lot of companies which are talking about scope 3 emission, right? So their scope 3 emission is coming in majorly from logistics, right? It's majorly from the transportation side. Now, we need to work with companies who are actually doing scope 1 and scope 2 reduction, because if those companies do scope 1 and scope 2 reduction, you are getting in material which is already a zero carbon footprint, right? So your scope 3 is actually coming down drastically when you are using those products in your products. With respect to scope 3 emissions, what you can also look at, and that's where you can partner with the logistics companies, and I can take an example of BDP and Dow kind of partnership which we did, where there is a renewable energy source which BDP is actually utilizing. They are utilizing that energy source to kind of charge their trucks, which is actually EV trucks, and those EV trucks are actually transporting chemicals across different regions. And believe me, you can reduce your carbon footprint by around 75%, right? The other thing which is happening is actually change from railways, change from road transportation to railway transportation. And if you can get in railway inside the plant, and if you can put the railways to kind of carry your material from the plant to the port, there is somewhere around 50 to 60% of carbon footprint reduction, right? So I think these are areas where kind of people are really looking at, because these are things which will actually be able to bring down the carbon footprint reduction very specifically. And the last piece which I want to talk about is actually circular logistics, right? And this is 10 years down the line, where you will see a lot of companies across the globe and government across the globe will come down and talk about circular logistics, right? And the infrastructure for us is majorly linear logistics, which means that you actually deliver your product to your customer, but you don't take back the material, right? Or you don't know where the material lands up, right? So for example, if you buy a television set, you actually get in a cardboard box, and you get in also polystyrene material in there. Now, when you have to throw that material, it's very difficult to then throw away the material. The cardboard box is what is taken care, but not the polystyrene material, right? So I think that is becoming very important to really decide that in the next 5 years, how can I really look at a circular logistics so that when I am sending my product to my customer, is my supply chain capable of taking back the material, right? So I'm delivering my material, and maybe I develop my infrastructure so that I take back my material from my customer and get it back to the company, right? Now, do we have that infrastructure possibility here in India? Like we do some IBC washing, we do some ISO container reuses, but those are very basic, right? So there would be regulations coming in where we say that you own the material which you produce. It's like a cradle to grave kind of story, and that's where your carbon footprint reduction will come into picture, right? That's where you would be accountable for the circular logistics, right? So, with that, I will not really take much of the time. I hope I've been within the 10 minutes and giving an overview of what is happening in the logistic industry as well as the integrated supply chain industry. I know I have a lot of experienced people on the dais which will be talking about supply chain as a whole, but I think I could give you an overview on what is happening and what is coming in the industry in the next 5 to 10 years. Yeah, thank you.